Alright, let's continue our exploration of determiners and especially articles with the null article. Okay, so now that we have studied how proper nouns behave, it is time to turn now to common nouns and to see how the null article works in more details. So when I first showed you this slide, I told you that you should use the null article when you don't want to build the reference, the when to show the link between the word and the referent when that was not necessary. Why would you do that? There are actually four reasons at least. Here they are. So, case number one, proper nouns. That we've just seen. When you say "I love Brad," no one is going to ask you who you're talking about. They might judge you and ask in disbelief if you really mean Brad Pitt, but the reference is pretty clear to everyone. Case number two is actually quite close. You don't build the reference because some element, and it usually is a number, builds it for you. When you say, "I'm in room 12, nobody is going to ask you which room. The room is identified thanks to the number. Or, on the contrary, 0 is there to tell you, "I don't want to identify your referent." When you say, "I went to school with Brad," you don't care which school. The point is not to identify the school, but to describe an action, which is basically studying. Finally, you don't want to build a reference in the case of generic references. It's actually very close to the previous case. When I say "I hate dogs," I don't want to identify a dog in particular. I'm talking about the whole species, so I'm not going to build the reference. So we'll see that in more details, but let's focus first on references that are already identified. So again here, we used an inductive method and started from examples to build up the rules, all right? The conclusions we've reached are the following. Common nouns followed by a number are preceded by the null article when the number identifies the referent. For example, "I'm on flight XZ3265. Please note that numbers are not the only thing that can identify a common noun. The letters can do so. If you look at the university rooms, for example, I'm in room D26, you use a combination of letters and numbers. We also saw that we need to use "the" with a proper noun followed by a number when the number identifies the category but not the referent. Let's make it clear. The Boeing 747 is a safe aircraft. Boeing is a brand, it's a proper noun. It is followed by a number which indicates the model, okay? What type of Boeing you're talking about, not the 777, the 747, okay? And in that case, you will need to use "the" in front of a proper noun followed by a number. Please practice that on activity 4 on the campus before we turn to the next point. Now, as we said before, sometimes you don't want to build a reference because you're talking about an activity. This case is limited to very specific situations that we're going to examine now. So you had to discuss this with a partner. You don't have a partner, you're in front of your computer. So let's just discuss this very briefly. Since his wife left him, Brad has not been going to church. 0 article. Brad suddenly realized he had to go back to the church. He had forgotten one of his children there. All right? In the first sentence, we don't care about a specific church. We're not talking about a place. We're talking about the activity of going to church, which means that Brad probably has a spiritual life. Okay? In the second sentence, on the contrary, we're interested in a geographical location, the building church, because it is where he left one of his children. All right? So this is how you make the difference between identifying a precise referent, and in this case you will need the article, or just describing an activity. You should do these exercises which help you make sure you understand these notions. And same thing, we had a little activity about imagining a short story using as many expressions as possible. If you did not come to that class, please do it. You start your story by saying you will never believe what happened today and try to use the structures in the best way possible. Then we worked on a method of analysis. I'm not going to develop that now because this is really something that we need to practice in class. You can, of course, practice at home and practice writing that, but I don't need to describe it to you. But this is the step that you should always follow. Describe the form. Remember, be smart. What type of determiner, what type of noun. Use what we did in the previous chapters. Explain the choice of article if the question is about articles. Give counterexamples if necessary. Translate it to French if it's necessary to, and comment. This is the word we used. We worked on the word television. I watched television in this bubble, and we analyzed the form in class. Let's move on to the next paragraph of this part. The final reason you would use the null article before a count noun is if you are referring to the whole set. In that case, why bother with reference building? Let me explain. When you don't wish to point to any specific items, why bother to build a reference? The null article is just fine. That works when the noun phrase refers back to an entire set. When you say, Brad loves women, you mean all the women in the world. It also works with subsets.
Je suis tout oui.
Shoot, this is my phone, which I'm going to turn off. So this works with subsets, such as women with long hair. When you say Brad loves women with long hair, you still refer to a set. A reduced one, but still it is considered as a set. It is still not specific, so you use a null article. This one will be tricky for you, so you need to always ask yourself, are we talking about something specific that I can clearly identify, or are we referring to a whole set or a whole group, even if it is a subgroup or a subset of a larger group? So we studied a number of examples, asking ourselves if those sentences were generic. Be careful. The null article may indicate a generic reference, but it can also indicate a non-generic reference. That is to say that you are referring to specific individuals or items, not the whole set. And generic references may also be conveyed by other articles than the null article. All right? So one thing must be very clear for you. You can't just say that the null article equals generic references. As you will see in a minute, it works for all references. So I'm afraid of big birds. When you say you're afraid of big birds, you are not referring to the entire set, but to a subset. So this is still a generic reference. But in the second sentence, the reference is non-generic. There are a certain number of birds, you haven't counted them, but there are several outside your house. You can actually see them. When you say, I heard a bird singing, here again you're referring to something specific, a specific bird. You may not see it, but you hear it. In sentence 4, you don't refer to a specific bird. You use what could be called an item among others in the set to represent the whole set. To be quite honest, you will rarely use that form. You would more naturally use the plural, like birds never forget where they laid their first egg. With the bird in sentence 5, it's almost the same, but it works as if you don't choose just any item to represent the set. You use the best example, you use the prototype, the perfect representative of the whole set. The bird is a more dangerous animal than you'd think. Here again, this form is rarely used and mostly used in documentaries. Okay, the lion is a fierce animal, for example. Note that for humans, you will say man and women and not the man or the woman. Finally, the bird in the last sentence is specific because you are talking about a bird that you have identified. It's the bird that you actually hear singing. So the lesson that you must remember is that the, a, and zero article can all refer to a generic or a non-generic situation. It all depends on the context. All right? So we need to dig a bit deeper now on this generic, non-generic contrast and opposition. So being able to distinguish between generic and non-generic references is not as easy as it seems. So let's start with the definition. Right, the definition must be learned by heart. The reference of a noun phrase is generic if it refers to an entire subset or notion. The reference is non-generic when it refers to specific items or instances of a notion, whether you can identify them precisely or not. Make sure you are able to recite that by heart. And by that point, you can go to eCampus, perform activity 5, and make sure you make the difference between a generic and a non-generic definition.